Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The hour is 7 o'clock, and as mayor, I hereby call to order the Laconia City Council meeting scheduled for January 25, 2016. As always, we'll begin our meeting tonight with a salute to our American flag. I'd ask you to please rise and join Councilor Brenda Baer in a salute and reciting, the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For the record, I would note that the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by City Clerk Mary Reynolds, and I would ask her to please call the roll.
Councilor Doyle.
Here.
Councilor Littman.
Here.
Councilor Baer.
Present.
Councilor Hamel.
Present.
Councilor Baldick.
Here.
Presiding Mayor Edward Engler.
Present. Let the record show that the council tonight, or first let the record show that 5 of the 6 councilors are present at the beginning of tonight's meeting and that we have a quorum. And also let the record show that the council is joined at the head table tonight by City Manager Scott Myers and the city's Chief Financial Officer Donna Witteman. First order of regular business is acceptance of minutes. And that would be for our last meeting on January 11th. Those minutes were distributed to the council on January 20th. No changes were suggested to the city clerk prior to tonight's meeting. So I'd give the councilors one last chance here to make any changes if necessary. And if not, I will declare that the minutes to the January 20th meeting are approved as submitted by the city clerk. Also note for the record that we have been joined by Councilor Bounds, and we're now 6 for 6. Welcome, Councilor. Consent and action calendar. We have one item on tonight's agenda, and that is a request, Order 2016-2 from the Laconia Little League for permission to hold their traditional opening day parade. This is a traffic order, temporary traffic order, and that parade is scheduled for the morning of Saturday, April 23rd. A motion to be in order to approve this request. Councilor Bolduc, seconded by Councilor Hamel. Any discussion of this request from Laconia Little League? All those in favor, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative, and that request again this year is approved. Next up, citizen comments for matters not on tonight's agenda. This is the appropriate time for anyone in our audience who wishes to address council to do so if the matter at issue is not covered anywhere on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone who'd like to speak who would meet that description? No? Okay, we have no interviews, communications. I have one item here which I will pass on to council. If I could, I received a postcard the other day, a very nice postcard here. That says, "It is with grateful appreciation that we, the members of Laconia's Heritage Commission, thank the Laconia City Council for their efforts on preserving the monumental oak tree located on Union Avenue." And it is signed by all of the members of Laconia Heritage Commission. So pass that around. Take a look at that. As I'm sure all of you are aware, we passed a resolution, I believe, at our last meeting in December, I think, asking the planning board to take a certain look at that situation. And in the meantime, the developer, as I understand it, withdrew their application to amend their site plan to take that tree down. For the foreseeable future anyway, it is now a dead issue. Poor choice of words, perhaps. Okay. Public input. As council knows, for the last meeting and this meeting and the 2 meetings scheduled for February, we have reserved some time for people to come and address council, if it's their pleasure to do so, about the overall issue of zoning in the Weirs Beach Commercial Resort Zone, the CR zone of the city. And so I would ask if there's anyone in our audience tonight who wishes to address the council on matters pertaining to Weirs zoning. See anybody moving? In lieu of that, or in addition to that, I would call your attention, councilors, to the map that you have in front of you. And there's an accompanying sheet of paper, I think, that lists a bunch of addresses on it. It says 277 Union Avenue on the first line. And then there is a larger version of that map in front of us over here. And the difference between that map and the one that you have in front of you is that the larger map has some red dots on it, which I'm too blind to see from here. So I don't know whether you can see them or not, but I'll explain what this is about. This is this came out of a conversation I had with the city manager a few weeks ago, and about this general issue of zoning in the Weirs Beach area of the city. And what I asked was, that coming out of that meeting, as you can see, the dark blue area there is the commercial resort zone, but also colored on this map are all of the commercially zoned areas of the city. Okay, so we've taken out anything that's not, in terms of color added, we've taken out anything that isn't commercially zoned. And so you see there, based on the various colors, the parts of the city that currently are zoned for commercial application. And the question that I asked, or that City Manager Myers and I had, were, if you look at the city as a whole, the way it's currently zoned, if we went about identifying all of the significant parcels of land in the city that are either vacant now or are underdeveloped. Use your own definition, if you will, and I'm sure we might disagree, all of us, a little bit on what underdeveloped means. But so undeveloped or underdeveloped, if we listed all those properties throughout the city where commercial development could take place under current zoning regulations, what do we find? And what you have there is the list that the planning department developed, and what you would see on the map, if you could see it here, is probably 80% or more of those lots are in the commercial resort zone, meaning that almost all of the commercial development potential in the city, as presently mapped, lies in that zone. And that, I think, is a perfect example of why this discussion we're having at the present time, or trying to have at the present time, is so important in terms of the city's future. The other statistic that Mr. Myers mentioned to me today when we were following up on this discussion was that he checked the city records and found that, with the assessing department, I believe, and found that 85%?
It's a little over 85%.
A little over 85% of our total tax burden falls on residential, and only 15% falls on commercial. And a normal, healthy relationship would be what?
In cities, so eliminating towns where you may not see it, is somewhere in the area usually of a 65-35, 70-30, would be considered in the normal range for cities in New Hampshire.
So if normal, healthy range is 65 to 70% residential, we're 85% already. And so, I think that's one of the major issues at hand. I just wanted to call everybody's attention to that in terms of how little development potential we have right now for commercial. And that's one of the subjects at hand, is whether or not we should be preserving, to a greater degree than we are, the remaining potential for commercial development in the city. Any questions about any of that?
I've got some comments.
I'm sorry?
I have some comments. Are you leaving this subject?
I was going to. You're welcome to.
Well, I just have some comments.
Okay. Can you move the microphone over in front of you there, please?
How come I can't remember to do that yet?
A couple more times.
You have faith in me, Henry. Thank you. Have we had, let me ask the question first. Have we had any actual input from anybody in the form of a letter, a comment, with respect to the 2 hearings that we've had?
We had one person, and at our last meeting, none tonight, and we've had several people contact the city manager's office who indicated that they were going to submit written comments, as I recall.
We had a couple of speakers who were scheduled for 2 weeks ago who had conflicts in their schedule and didn't come. I'm expecting them to come at a later date, and a couple indicated they would be submitting written comments at some point in the near future.
I don't mean to belittle it, but at this point of this, we're halfway through this, and at this point, we've had one person actually comment on some of the things that we're doing here. Okay.
They're all in Florida.
That is probably true. That is probably true. I don't want to cut short this discussion, and I want to go forward with the final 2 hearings that we've got scheduled and listen carefully to the proposals, because what you're saying makes sense in that if we could find a way to bring in some commercial development, and as you describe it, in this strip of land is 80% of the property that's available for commercial development in the city of Laconia. I would be all for that. But I also think that at some point we ought to get this to the zoning task force for some kind of review and independent study and recommendations back to us. I know you love the zoning task force, Bob. And because we're doing this in a vacuum right now. I'm not faulting you, but it really is kind of a vacuum. We've got this really good idea.
Well, we're trying to get the conversation started,
I
is
know.
what we're doing. We're really not doing anything at this point in time other than talking.
I didn't mean that as criticism. And if you
not
took it
either.
that way, I apologize. But right now, I think we just need some more input. We're going to have some major pieces of the master plan put together, I hope by June of this year. I see that smile on your face.
You and I have a wager on that, Carl.
Yeah, I'm going to Florida if I win that bet. So those are just my thoughts, because there's other ways, there's other ways that we can incorporate this kind of effort. We can do it with tax incentives. I know we tried to do it downtown before, and it didn't work out very well. But we can try to do it again for this strip of property. We can try to do it again for the downtown. The downtown's looking a lot better with the Colonial going up and the garage coming down, believe it or not. So I just want to be a little more expansive in terms of how we're going about this. That's my
Okay,
thought.
well, let me, in terms of how we're going about this, my general thought on this is that, and it's up to the will of the council, certainly not up to me, but what I would be asking or pushing for personally would be that in March, we would form, at one of the 2 meetings in March, we would form our recommendations, as general or specific as they might be, in this area, and forward those to the planning board, and ask them to delve into it in greater detail and more study, and I'm assuming they will assign that task to the zoning task force. So that would happen, in my timetable, that would happen in March.
Okay, I'm not saying I oppose that. I'm saying that my misgiving about that is that when we get done with the 4 meetings in February, we're going to have as much input as we've got right now with respect to what we might do.
Well, we don't
And
know
I hope
that.
that's not true.
Yeah.
I really want people to come in and say, look, this is what I want and all that stuff. But that's my misgivings about it, so.
Okay, fair enough. Counselor Littman?
I appreciated the strategic view of this in terms of what our distribution is, because I think in terms of giving some direction to the process, targeting that we want to move directionally from 85% to some more reasonable percentage that's a healthier balance, I think is, thanks for bringing that forward tonight.
Anyone else want to weigh in tonight on this? Counselor Hamel?
So the white area is residential,
Off limits to commercial development.
but like going up Parade Road or further North Main Street, whatever, zoning could be changed to
Could be. This is under
commercial
current zoning
resort or
regulations.
commercial, residential, or whatever, correct?
Right. Yes.
Those fields and all that stuff that's up there? Okay.
This is under what's currently allowed.
Currently allowed, okay.
Yes.
Good point.
Absolutely a good point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can I ask another question? I don't mind the process that we're doing now, but I've had some comments from some people of why we're not doing this more in the spring when more people are around from the Weirs that could comment on this here. Is there any, your schedule is March, is there any thought of delaying a little bit so that people can come back and comment, or
Well,
did you want to?
I think the problem is, well,
Not saying that they're going to comment even if they come back.
I
but-
think I'll take both of you, I believe that's constructive criticism. I think what I would say to both of you in response to that is that it's such a long, involved process, and I agree with Counselor Bounds to the standpoint that this should be incorporated, any changes we might seriously consider or make at the council level, and only we can change zoning, need to be incorporated into the new master plan. So if we wait too long, then we're not part of that process anymore. The master plan will be finished, and we'll be talking about changing something that, has already
See,
gotten
easy,
finished. So, and this is only the beginning of the process. It's a reminder, what we set out to do here, as opposed to what we did a year ago, was to try to give, rather than just ask the planning board to look at zoning issues in the Weirs in general, to ask them to look at specific things, or a specific thing, more specific than we did last time, and specific proposals if we want to make them or whatever, and then it'll be up to them to do that. They'll hold a public hearing, and let's face it, what happened last time certainly can be instructive also, from the standpoint that we sent it to the planning board, they sent it to the zoning task force. The zoning task force put a great deal of time and effort, held public hearings, which no one came to, sent it back to the planning board, which no one came to. Then only when it got back to us did the firestorm develop, and we ended up with
No. The firestorm started at the planning board hearing. That they were present at that time.
a couple of them were.
A couple of them were.
But the big firestorm came when it got back to us. So, anyway, go ahead.
So if this area here is already zoned commercial resort, what are we looking to change? I mean, in my mind, what we went through last year with everything.
Well, I can tell
And
you
it
what the
came
issue
back
is.
to us, and then we had the audience that finally showed up when you're getting ready to make a decision, or after you make a decision. My thought of this process was that we would review or have the planning department review what's allowed, what's not allowed within that commercial resort.
Well, and exactly, and I think that, and they did that, and they made some minor change my opinion, minor
Yeah.
change recommendations.
So are we going, to kind of,
The difference between the commercial and the commercial resort, okay, and I'm not suggesting that everything that's marked commercial resort on this map needs to be changed.
okay,
I'm specifically talking about the corridor along Route 3 and Endicott Street East is what's of interest to me, because that's where all the properties we're talking about are located.
so what's your idea? Is it going to be more commercial or leaving it commercial
What I
resort, or-
question is whether or not it's wise on the city's, from the city's standpoint, to allow residential development within that corridor,
So you're looking.
within so many feet of the highway, so to speak.
Okay.
Okay? That's what I'm questioning, because right now, the difference between the regular commercial and the commercial resort is that the commercial is pretty much the same in terms of what's allowed and not allowed. But what's not allowed in the commercial zone is residential development, but it is allowed at the Weirs. So theoretically, every one of those lots could be a trailer park under current zoning.
Okay.
And that's what I'm worried about, is that we know that the direction in the Weirs historically over the last 15 years has gone toward residential development, not commercial development. And if that trend continues in that corridor, all that land could be gone before, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we would have no commercial land available, whatever.
That's right.
Okay, all right,
Because right now, you can go either direction with it.
yeah. So you could have it, just going to throw it like an industry building and then a house right next door to it, right now.
Yes, not industry per se, but,
Well-
yeah, you could have a
Car dealership, or
shopping
whatever.
mall or
shopping-
whatever,
yeah.
you know, a strip shopping center right next to a condo development or a trailer park or a manufactured housing park or whatever.
Okay, I follow your,
Yeah, that's,
Your end
that-
result
my,
there.
my problem with it is that most of that property, the people aren't here. And we're gonna make a decision when they're not here, and then it's gonna be, you know,
Well, but I think what I said was by the time this thing runs its course, it's not going to be, it's going to be spring, summer.
so you think it'll be, the people will be here.
It's just not going to
but-
happen that fast. I mean,
No, I agree 100%. The process is going to take that. Additionally, we mailed 25 or 28 letters specifically to property owners that kind of fell in this corridor who had significant land or frontage along either of the areas the mayor just spoke to. So we targeted specific people with direct mail as opposed to just, you know, an ad in the newspaper saying, please come down. We did some outreach, but the mayor is absolutely correct. If this does go to the planning board in March, by the time they assign it, study, come back with recommendations, hold the public hearing, everybody should be back, and then it's got an opportunity to come back to the council for some fine-tuning, some additional comment, and a vote, if that's the council's desire, while those people are here.
Yeah, well, that's what I'd like to see.
Councilor Hamel?
now also, if I remember right in your comments, you're mainly looking at from the bridge north at the Weirs, correct?
From, well, I mean, it's not up to me to determine that.
No, but I mean, that's your,
Personally, I'm looking from the corridor from the Surf Coaster property
yeah,
All
to the
way.
Meredith Town line.
so the surf coaster on White Oaks?
Right over.
At the corner of White Oaks,
White
the
Oaks.
corner of White Oaks and Endicott Street East,
Okay,
straight across or up to the Meredith Town line, that corridor.
And while this process is going on, there's nothing precluding the council from having further hearings or further discussions with respect to the proposals that are out there and what the feedback we're getting is. Nothing at all. So it's a fluid process.
Okay. Public hearings, we have none scheduled tonight. Presentations, we do have a special guest tonight, a presentation of our annual comprehensive annual financial report. And I believe Mr. Mohan, Pat, right? Good evening. From Melanson and Heath in Nashua, our auditing firm is here tonight to, I think all of you have a copy of the audit report. And we'll let you walk us through it.
All right,
Welcome.
fantastic. Good evening. My name is Pat Mohan. manager with Melanson Heath and Company. I'm actually filling in tonight for Mr. Scott McIntyre, who's the partner in charge of this job. He asked me, he had to be called away, so he was initially going to do the presentation. I'm kind of filling in for him, but I do have a history with the city. A number of years ago, approximately 3 to 4, I've been in here to do a presentation. I also live locally, so it really wasn't that bad of an assignment because I'm just over in Meredith. So, but tonight I'm going to be presenting 2 documents, the annual financial statements and the management letter. So if you could turn to page 1, which is the independent auditor's report. The independent auditor's report identifies the management's responsibility and the auditor's responsibility. And part of the auditor's responsibility is to provide an opinion to the city as to whether these financial statements are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. On page 2 of the letter, in the opinions, we can see that their financial statements are unmodified, which means it's relatively a clean opinion.
I'm not sure you and I were all on the same page
No.
here. What does page 1 look like?
Page 1 of,
Got the one with the logo on it?
The blue.
yes, the logo. So it's the actual page 1
Yeah,
versus
It's not
the,
numbered, that's why the
yeah.
confusion.
Oh, okay.
The next page is 2.
Page 2.
Next page is
There's
2.
nothing
All
on
right.
2.
So we'll go to page 2.
It's actually page 3.
I think it's 3 that you want.
That's all we have on page 2.
Yeah, and page 2 is just a,
It's the page you want right here, right?
Page 2 is the opinions. I thought we were,
Prior
have
year
that.
recommendation?
Okay, it's the second page 2. We have one page 1 and the second page 2, so
yeah, there is.
it's about 10 pages in.
Yeah.
There's actually 2 documents assembled in the book. So
Yeah.
the first page, 1 and 2, is
Yeah.
part of the management letter.
Okay.
And if you go in a little bit deeper, so if you
We're
go
good
in
now.
about 10 or 15 pages.
It's page 1, number 2.
Okay. Thank you, Ava.
Sorry for the confusion.
yeah, I'm going to keep this one. Thank you. Sorry about the confusion there. We will refer back to the management letter at the end. With the second page 2, which is the independent auditor's report, it has the logo. Page 2, about 3/4 of the way up, there's the opinions. In the opinion, again, it's unmodified.
When you say unmodified, what do you mean?
It's the form of a clean opinion, but they can't say clean opinion anymore.
Correct. A clean opinion means that,
Go
or
back the other way.
unmodified means that there are no exceptions. There's, sometimes there can be qualifications or even an adverse opinion. And one of the big things we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement 68, which the city did implement. Had they not implemented that, there would have been an adverse opinion here. However, the financial statements are unmodified, which means that they are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and traditionally have been. There have been clean opinion for a number of years within the city. So the financial statements are all in accordance with all accounting statements at this point in time. So based on that, there's a management's discussion and analysis that is on pages 4 through 12. There's a summary. I'd like to go to page 13, which is the statement of net position. And we should all be in line. The statement of net position, it presents the governmental activities and the business type activities on the accrual basis. Prior to getting into numbers, typically the presentation would identify what these things are and then go into some of the significant changes. However, I just really like to jump to the significant change this year is the implementation of GASB 68, which is the pension reporting. It was effective for June 30, 2015. It's significant. It changed all financial statements in New Hampshire, specifically cities that are large, also towns, because it brings about the reporting of the unfunded liability at the state of New Hampshire's retirement system for all the member communities, and it's passing that liability down in a proportionate share to its members. And by doing so, that has a significant impact on the statement of net position. So wanted to discuss that prior to even just talking about numbers. There's three main accounts that will be impacted here, two of which have been on these statements for a little while: deferred outflows, deferred inflows, and then a new account, the net pension liability. The deferred outflows, so you know, it's actuarially determined, the net pension liability. So it's not management's number or calculation. It's not the auditor's calculations. It's the actuary that the state of New Hampshire has hired, and that number is also audited outside of that. It's also 1 year behind. So that actuarial number is June 30, 2014. And I bring that about because the first account that I talked about, deferred outflows, that account has always been there. However, it's really active this year because it represents the contributions the city made to the New Hampshire retirement system this fiscal year, meaning as of June 30, 2015. And what's going to happen is that will be incorporated into the calculation next year. The other account, the deferred inflows, is another active account and will be on a regular ongoing basis because this statement is not going away. And the actuarials are going to be doing a study each year, again, a year behind. And part of the study is, and also the impact, is the market value on their investments. And part of that is involving the discount rate, which is 7.75%. But the biggest piece of that is, as the market changes and the projections change at the retirement system, the proportionate share gets handed down to the city. In order to keep things smooth, they've come up with a way and a calculation that'll be put into deferred inflows, and it'll be amortized over a 5-year period. So every 5 years, it'll essentially smooth out this net pension liability. The net pension liability is the big number, and that's what a lot of people are familiar about, and that's what's been talked about as far as, you know, this unfunded liability that the state has. All the members are part of it. You know, the impact of what it's going to be like when it's handed down. Well, that's the big number, and that big number is going to have an effect, you know, potentially with credit rating agencies. Now, it's not because they didn't know it wasn't there, because the retirement system's always had that liability. And the credit rating agencies have known that the members have a share of that liability. However, it was never designated individually up until this new statement. So the credit agencies have known it's been there. They also know that there's a funding schedule that the state has accomplished to bring that down. And it really has taken place, you know, 3 to 4 years ago, when you remember how the state retirement rates increased significantly. The state stopped contributing, you know, on behalf payments with the city, and you saw your public safety, your education, all those rates increase. So essentially, you've been paying now for 3 or 4 years towards this unfunded liability, essentially getting ready for this statement. So that, with that being said, let's get into the numbers and see what's happening. First and foremost, there was a restatement that took place, which means that part of the initial period would mean that we had to go back and restate last year's net position for the effect as if it took place. The effect on that was to bring the overall net position down by $38,334,238. So that brought on this new statement. That's not represented here. There's a footnote in the back pages.
Page 55.
Page 55. That restates the prior year to bring the net position again to beginning of the year to $33,858,583. So in a sense, it almost cut it in half. We're now rolling into this current year, and if you look in the governmental activities column, which is in the middle, and you go approximately 3/4 of the way down, you'll see a line, net pension liability, and this is on page 13, and the amount is $37,059,606. That represents the city and the school's proportionate share of the unfunded liability. as of June 30, 2015.
They're non-current.
Are we still off pages?
No, just
No,
trying to
I
find it
don't.
on the,
Yeah,
Okay.
wasn't called that.
37 million.
Yeah,
37,059,606 is the net pension liability of the city and the school. And just as a little history, a lot of this information can be found on the State of New Hampshire's retirement website. They have the proportionate share broken down by all the member communities. So that is where this number is coming from. Again, it's not a management estimate, it's not a auditor's estimate, it's been passed down. So taking that into account, the impact, if you go all the way down the middle column, the second number from the top, the unrestricted, is in brackets. It's a negative $35,269,366. Excuse me. Last year, that same number was $621,555. So you can see, you know, without getting into any of the other numbers, how dramatic the effect of this statement was. But again, it wasn't up to the city for the most part. This is a national statement, meaning that all financial statements had to implement this. So you're not alone in it. It did have a dramatic effect on your financial statements. It's not going to go away. But your overall net position is still positive, though, which is your very final number, $37,904,637. And again, the credit agencies are going to weigh that in. They're going to look at your total net position as well as your unassigned, and also, especially the first year, the actuaries are going to come out with another report. And again, the idea is that that $37 million is going to hopefully maintain some continuity over time. Again, I don't do the calculation. It's fairly complicated, but the idea of some of the deferred outflows and the inflows is to make sure that that's a consistent number. The other main piece is that at this point, the funding for this, if the city was wanting to or had the ability to write a check for the $37 million, you can't right at the moment. So that's another factor that the credit agencies are going to weigh in. Even if you wanted to do something, you can't right at the moment. So that's a factor in itself. So they're aware of it. They're taking everything into consideration. It's a number that, in theory, is going to be paid down over a number of years between contributions and other factors. So prior to getting into anything else, maybe it's a good time to stop and see if there's any questions on the net pension liability.
Councilor Hamilton.
So are you saying that this is our share of the so-called $4 billion state shortfall?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
In round numbers, you'll see in here, we're pretty close to 1%. I think it's 1.04% or something, but in round terms, so 1% of $4 billion would be 40 million, and ours is that $37 million number, so it's for real round numbers. The legislature did a couple of years ago adopt a plan towards, as Pat mentioned, towards rate increases and setting more realistic rates of return, and I think at the time when it was done, it was like a 27-year plan towards paying this off. So there's no expectation that it's paid off in 1, 5, or 10 years. That's just that's pie in the sky number. But the legislature adopted a program to have this done, and I think at the time it was a 27-year program. 27-year payment schedule, you will, in order to get caught up on the unfunded liability.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Excuse me, I'm just slow and stupid sometimes, but I'd like you to explain how we get that number from the deficit. Is that the deficit that the state is running with respect to this? And is it nationwide, and how did this happen?
Well, I would say, first and foremost, it's nationwide, and it did come out of, like anything else, things happening, like a city of Detroit, where they ran into all significant, many significant financial problems. The other piece of this is when they're trying to make comparisons from one community to the next, it does vary state by state. The state of New Hampshire has one contributory retirement system where all the members pay into it, if you were to go into Massachusetts, there are towns that have their own retirement system. There are others that have a county retirement systems. You go to a different state, there's multiple variations. So to make things comparative, especially with the rating agencies, because they like to see things comparative, that's how we began with GASB 34 to bring on your capital assets, to bring everything into this governmental activities. They've been building to try and make things comparable across everything. And part of that was to then say, all right, we know that the state of New Hampshire has this unfunded liability. However, the liability is really made up of, it's really passed down to all the members. In order to make things comparable, we should have a statement that passes down that liability on an individual basis so that your proportionate share is based on the covered wages. So
On the covered one?
covered wages. So the employee wages that
Okay,
are...
I got you.
By
Okay.
state law.
Yes. So that's how your proportionate share is calculated, so that it isn't necessarily a retirement saying that, 1% is the city of Laconia and someone else is this. They did have to come up with a basis of being able to pass that down.
But our 1% is based solely on the state of New Hampshire's retirement system. We're not blending numbers in across the other 49 states as well.
That's
New
just-
Hampshire owns this liability, which is in the $4 billion range.
And is this going to increase? Is it-
Good.
Anytime you don't want to answer one of the questions, pal, look my way.
I mean, put it in layman's terms, basically, the legislature passed laws that said, this is the benefits public employees are entitled to, but no one set aside enough money to cover paying those benefits.
Not quite, actually. There's a
Not quite accurate, okay? You give it a
There's
shot.
there's a pension, the legislature has a pension board that they put in place, and the representation on the pension board has a certain weighting on it that has led over time for it to, when things were really good in the stock market early and there was some great returns, they overpromised what the benefit would support based on the contributions. And so now we have a situation where we're about 60 or 70, 60-something to 70-something % funded of our liability. And so that represents the unfunded portion. And there's been legislative attempts to try to balance the board out a little bit more. And those haven't gone anywhere, but this is kind of where we're at.
So the board has made commitments, but the legislature hasn't forced the municipalities to fund it.
Well, that, with the hope that sometime, investment returns would be better, and we have forced the towns to put more money in. That's been one of our bigger line items in the budget over the last probably 6 or 8 years to increase the funding to try to put it in a better position.
Sure.
Plus, they allowed a lot more people in the pension plan,
Yeah, a
too.
number of things have changed over the years, and Council Libbin hit on them. During better times, there was actually some suspension of payments by the municipalities into the retirement system, which caused it to fall behind. Also, in good times, legislature was more likely to increase benefits above and beyond the basics. Rates of return were probably a little bit more aggressively stated with the projections. A number of things. There's enough blame to go around for, the employer side, the employee side. The makeup of the Retirement System Board of Trustees was very heavily weighted in the employee camp for a number of years. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago, that changed, where there's now a more balanced representation. They're using a lower assumed rate of return with it. But, Councilor Hamel, you're correct. There are more people who have now retired into it, and it's a little bit like Social Security. There are, fewer people paying in for more retirees now, and that's having a drain on the system. The legislature did address some items as to what is being used to calculate final pay, and they've extended for folks who weren't vested that it's no longer your highest 3 years earnings, and there's certain outside detail pay and items that are excluded from it now. But some of those were not put in place for folks who were vested already. It was only for folks typically 10 years or less of service. So it's like turning the Titanic. We've made some changes, but they're not fully going to be realized and materialized into true savings until we get through several more years, and then it'll start to, maybe turn a little bit more noticeably. But there's a lot of moving pieces here, and we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight.
So,
The main purpose of this change is to, we know there was a boogeyman in the dark, now we know what it looks like.
so what is this going to look like in our budget? I mean,
Nothing more than this disclosure.
So this is just going to be an accounting number?
It's a little bit more than a counting number, but in effect, again, going to come back to, this is the statement of net position versus we're not really talking about the general fund or the property tax rates or anything. This is on the accrual basis of where we're reporting it. So yes, it is a number on your balance sheet here. However, you're not going to be funding it directly against this liability.
In other words, we're not going to have to reserve $3 million a year to pay this back, or it's not going to show up that way?
It'll be more of a pay-as-you-go, and as the
Yes.
rates reflect to get us caught up over that 25, 27-year period, it will reflect in those rates annually, but typically the Retirement System Board has adjusted rates every 2 years. They set a tentative rate in September of the year, they firm it up somewhere around November or December, and a new rate kicks in on July 1, and that rate historically is held for 2 years, and they'll adjust it again. There's different rate increases for police, for fire, for teachers, and then all other municipal employees are in their own group. So there's actually 4 different rates, and those are tied to actuarial results based on the membership in those particular groups.
It cost us about $200,000 or $300,000 last time it was updated.
The increase?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a relatively small increase too, because I think the increase based on payroll and the groups going up was that. And as Pat had pointed out, when the state stopped contributing and put the entire burden on cities and towns, that was about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and that increase was staggering.
Yes.
But they still hold the purse strings and make all the decisions on this.
It's more, well,
That's,
the
you know,
state...
you got the ones that ruin it still making the decisions.
Well, the state requires us to participate unless we set up an identical system on our own, so there's no real benefit to us going and creating, this type of a system for one
No.
community. But the Retirement System Board is much more balanced now. If you looked at the makeup, like I say, 6 years ago, I think there were 1, maybe 2 employer representatives, and then there was 2 teachers, 2 fire, 2 police, 2 other municipal employee representatives, and then there was the Senate President had a representative, and the House Speaker, and the Governor, and the Treasurer's one, so it made up the board, but it was heavily weighted in favor of labor. That has changed, where it's balanced in that sense now. And I think everybody has the goal of wanting a system that's going to be healthy and there for our employees for the long term. We just have to work collectively to get through this over the period of the next 20 years.
All right,
Go ahead.
Moving on.
moving on.
I still don't understand, but I'll figure it out.
Keep paying it.
As we're talking about these, the impacts, the next, what I would think as a significant impact is, it's not going to happen until June 30, 2017. However, there's going to be another statement that is going to require the full reporting of other post-employment benefits. You're currently reporting what the current liability is. It's more commonly referred to as the OPEB liability, which represents the liability due to the fact that you have retirees still purchasing the health plans within the active group. So in a sense, because they're part of the active group, and it's not any different than anyone else, there's a value there. Because in theory, if they were in a separate pool, there would be different rates. The actuaries, again, come up with factors on what that cost is, and it's put into the statements. As of June 30, 2015, that number was $1,171,007. Again, that's for city and school. I'm really just talking city school right now. We can talk about the business type activities. That number is comprised, and if you, again, if you look at the $37 million number, right underneath that is other liabilities net of current portion, $4,130,803.
What page are you on, Pat?
Still on 13.
Still on page 13.
Right below the 37 million.
Right below the 37 million, I figured I'd go right there. There's really two key components, the compensated absence, which is your sick and vacation time that is accrued and a potential liability as of year end. But then the other post-employment benefits, which is part of that number, again, $1,171,007. Now, GASB 75, which again is effective June 30, 2017, is stating at this point in time, you would bring on the full actuarial liability at that point in time, which that would be $7,218,582. And it's
Where's that number?
that's within the footnotes. That is on page.
Oh, okay.
55.
It's footnote number 22. It begins on page 46, but the number itself is on page 48. So if you turn to page 48 real quick. Letter E, the funded status and funding progress. The actuary accrued liability, the AAL, of $7,218,562. What they're saying is, assuming that, again, the actuarial report is done, there's an interim each year, and it's fully done every 2 years by the city to be in compliance. Part of what's going to be required in a couple of years is that that full amount is going to be reported. Again, that can go up and down, that's based on the actuarials. But, again, that's going to have an impact on your statement of net position as we're talking about bond rating agencies and things like that. However, it is a national statement. So, again, it's all getting back to that comparability of city to city, town to town, so that they can put that number. Currently, it's brought on each year as an increase. But I wanted to point that out as we're talking about the statement of net position and significant impacts, even though it's a couple years down the road.
I just want to jump in quickly on that because I have a little heartburn when we look at this number, not anything that we're doing as a city because every community's got to do it, but in looking at this number, and Pat may cringe at my choice of words, but I look at it, one of them, and they're all real numbers in terms of reporting them. The accrued liability that we have for leave time and vacation time, absolutely a real number, and that is. The other number, which is made up of the retirees who are on our health insurance number, to me is a little bit more floating out there in make-believe land. And I'm going to describe it this way. State law requires that we offer our retirees to stay on our group health insurance. Every community has to do that. It's not that we're doing anything above and beyond. By having retirees in our group health insurance plan, typically retirees are older, they blend into the group, they raise the average age of the group.
Right.
All right? The older the group, statistically, the higher your rates are because of claims and other things going to it. So pretty straightforward. We're no different than any other community. Our retirees pay 100% of their health insurance. Okay, the city's not subsidizing any city employees for their health insurance. They're paying 100%, as is the city paying our share and the employees paying their share all the way along. So in real dollars, there's not a liability. Where this liability comes from is what our rates are above and beyond what they would be if we didn't have to factor the retirees into our group. Well, state law tells us we have to factor the retirees into the group, so it's just kind of like circling the numbers around to come up with, well, if you didn't have the retirees, you'd be paying X amount less. But because you have the retirees, you're paying X amount more. Retirees are paying 100% pay-as-you-go, the city's paying 100% pay-as-you-go, the employees are paying 100% pay-as-you-go. I look at that as a very different number than the leave time we have on the books for the employees. That is a real number that needs to be paid out somewhere in the future. So when Donna and I sat down and went through, which number was it? Was GASB, which one did the?
75?
75. We got off the conference call, and it wasn't with Pat and his group, it was with the auditors. And I probably had a few choice words that I can't repeat here tonight, but it was just frustrating the way they run these things and spin around. But, so to me, yes, it's a number we're going to account for here. It's going to show up on our statements. It's going to, affect the net position in that sense. But I just want you to understand that it's not, to me, it's vastly different than our retirement system, the 37 million, and our accrued leave liability number, which is in the books, which is also a number that needs to be paid out. So hopefully that kind of explains it a little bit, but sometimes I think these government accounting standard boards have too much time on their hands to create new requirements. And I'll get off the soapbox now.
Yes.
The 37 million that you say the city will be responsible for at some point, is that a true figure of the people we have on retirement now and what employees we have going to that goal? Or is this just a number that the state's, well, you'll be responsible for that amount no matter what your employee status is?
I would answer that by, this is the city's number based on the allocation out of the entire unfunded liability, not by person to person, I think is a better way to look at it. That you make up 1% based on the wages that are current that you're paying in on. I think that's
We're paying 1% of current wages.
No. The entire unfunded liability, based on all the members paying in to the New Hampshire retirement system, the city of Laconia makes up 1% of all the contributions going to the state of New Hampshire based on what they consider the covered wages, those wages that are subject to the retirement contributions.
So if the city of Concord, in just in terms of population, is roughly triple our size, 3 times our size, without even knowing their number, we could estimate that, if their payroll was 3 times our city payroll, all things being equal, their number might be 115 or 120 million because they represent 3% of the pie.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're getting anything handed to us that isn't equitable in that sense, but it's based on your covered payroll, and the larger communities are going to have a bigger number, but they,
So we look at the entire liability, and we're 1% of that, and that's where the 37 million comes from. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not based on who's working in DPW right now and what we promised they would have 50 years from now or something or other, necessarily.
In some sense, yes.
It's kind of out there.
In a sense, yes, but it's a real number
State.
that the actuaries do calculate, that do have a multitude of components, but what it does come down to is really breaking that number down by the number of the current employees that have wages that are subject to the New Hampshire retirement system, and that the retirement system looking at that number as compared to everybody else in totality.
A question for
Counselor Lippman.
Scott and Donna. So the amount that we contribute is based on what someone is earning the current salary, correct?
correct. And that's all the retirement system can collect the money from. They can't go back and collect it from retirees, so they're basing it on your current payroll, and it's a fixed number. It's a certain percent of payroll, depending on which one of the 4 groups you're in.
Once they, okay, so we're putting in money for people who are working for us now. Okay. When you retire, that comes out of the state pool? And now we still putting in money for those that retired? No?
No.
Okay.
But they're getting what they're entitled
Yeah,
to, and
through
if the
the
total investment
state.
return and who's paying into it isn't enough to support it, rates could increase to make up for the promises made.
It's like Social Security.
Yeah.
And not to belabor the OPEB point, but it is an accounting number, especially in the sense that you do pay as you go. So it's not an outstanding liability that the city hasn't paid, which is another, again, it's not going to have that OPEB, when it comes on board, is not going to have an impact on tax rates. So again, it's more of an accounting number on the statement in that position.
Well, it's kind of like the analogy would be the Social Security adjustment that was made during the Reagan administration, where they calculated that there wasn't enough money being collected at the current tax rate to pay out future benefits, so there was a compromise to raise the amount collected so that it would be in excess of what was actually needed at the moment to pay out the current collectors of Social Security, to try to build up a reserve.
They did that well.
Okay.
IOUs.
Couple of other just key notes on this, because I don't have a lot more to say on this. New debt issued for the city. As you know, there was a QZAB note and a regular general obligation bond.
Page are you on now again?
Still on page 13.
13.
Just pointing out that your bonds payable in totality had new issues, an $8.1 million issue and a $1.8 million issue, as compared to what the payments were, which were approximately 2.5. So again, it's a significant, because it's $9 million worth of new bonds.
It doesn't reflect the state matching.
Correct.
It's just the aggregate amount. It's not the amount that we actually have to pay back.
So now, if you could turn to page 15. Page 15 is far more reasonable and far more friendly. It represents your balance sheet for your general fund and your non-major governmental funds. The general fund, again, is a combination of your regular general fund and capital reserves, and then your non-major governmental funds are your capital projects, your special revenue, your permanent funds into that column. My focus is going to be on the general fund. We can start with the very first number, the cash and short-term investments of $15,500,756. Significant cash balance. It did increase almost $7 million as compared to last year's financial statements. But I'd like to bring your eyes down about midway to the page. Due to other funds in the same column, that cash balance is offset by $7,792,753, which is, in a sense, the money is sitting in the cash account in the general fund, and it's going to be due to other funds at such time as expenditures are coming down. So because the cash balance, if you were doing a comparison, it did increase, a lot of that increase is also offset to other funds. Additionally, part of that increase is that if you look at your receivables, which is the fourth number down from the top, receivables for property tax, $5,368,031. In comparison to last year, that number's gone down. It was just over $9 million last year. And really what it represents is the fact of when the bills were issued. So it comes across as bills were issued a little bit earlier. That way the cash collections are coming in earlier. That's also going to impact that cash balance. So it's all very good. And would also say that really most of it's current. Of the $5,368,000, $983,694 is represented by other taxes, primarily of tax liens, so that when the process comes up, the city is secured in being able to collect on those back taxes. So if they go past 2 years, the tax collector is setting out a lien so that the city won't lose those monies. So most of that balance of $5,368,000 is really sitting in your current bills that were issued at the time in May. So that's very good controls on that. I'd like to come down all the way to the third to last number, your unassigned balance of $5,357,809. That, in comparison to your expenditures, represents a balance of 9.7%. When you look at your unassigned fund balance that you would be able to use potentially to reduce the tax rate or anything else that would be deemed necessary, that's a very good balance. Most of the time that balance is wanted for GFOA, or the DRA likes to see that balance anywhere from 5 to 15%, depending on the size, depending on the complexity of what's going on. So you're right there in a very good standing. It wasn't a dramatic increase from last year. Last year was made up at 10.5%. And overall, it really had a change of 216,603. And a big part of that was the fact that the city did use just over $800,000 worth of unassigned fund balance in the previous year. So anytime you're going to use fund balance, which means that you're not sending out property tax bills for that money, means you're dipping into savings and you're hopefully trying to recoup it based on your projections for your revenues and expenditures, making sure you're doing conservative estimates, and then seeing the impact, at year-end close. So
Where on the balance sheet is the 1.4 million we have out on loan to BEDC?
That was in July.
That's not on this.
Not on this
Started
sheet.
on this fiscal year, yeah.
Okay. So that would be part of that $5.3 million reserve.
It would be backed out, it would not be unassigned fund balance at that point. It would be designated for that particular cause, you're correct.
So, again,
Brenda has a frown on her face over here.
All that it means in that case, when we look at this next year, instead of having that 1.4 million as cash that you could do, I want to say anything you want with, but it's unrestricted, now it's there as an asset, as a
It'll be
value,
on the
but
balance
it's
sheet.
restricted. It's not sitting there in cash in hand for us. But we're certainly not cash poor by any stretch of the imagination, and we did a cash flow analysis to figure out what the impact would be, and that's not going to jeopardize us to have to do any short-term borrowing or tax anticipation notes because we've restricted that 1.4
Were we
million.
at 6 million last year? Isn't that the figure we usually?
No, I think what the number Pat just said, a little over $200,000 higher than we are right now, so I want to say it's probably in the area of
$5,574,412.
Yep.
It's also true, though, that we're earning more interest income on the loan than we would if it was in a bank account.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
3 times as much.
at least.
Coming in.
Yeah.
if you would turn now to, I don't have a lot of other things unless there's some questions on the balance sheet. I'd like to go to the budget versus actual page, which is on page 19. Page 19, the budget versus actual. This is really the report card of the city, in effect, for the general fund, because it's comparing your general fund budget against your general fund expenditures and really matching things up. So, again, I really consider this a telltale of how the city did, in particular for regular operations within the general fund. If you go to the far right-hand column, you'll see variances with final budget, positive or negative. Negative in brackets would mean an unfavorable number. If you go approximately a quarter of the way down, you see total revenues. You have a favorable variance of $190,891. That meaning that the revenues beat the budget. So you had more revenue come in than you were planning for. If you continue down the page, about 3/4 of the way, you'll see total expenditures, positive $417,865. That represents the fact that you didn't spend those additional dollars, so you were underneath your budget. So for a total of $608,756, which is considered really going back towards unassigned fund balance or fund balance in total. You can see the effect of using the budgetary use of fund balance, $835,000. It's bracketed right underneath the 608 for a final negative $226,244. However, again, you come back to the fact that you wanted to use $835,000. You almost entirely recouped that back between your estimates on your revenues and your turnbacks on your departmentals from your budget. So overall, I would give that a high score because you were almost break even, and that's really where you want to be. So again, there's some differences, but there's no major swings in your revenues and your expenditures.
So that would be why the fund balance declined a couple $100,000.
Yes.
Right there.
Yes, directly related. If you could turn the page to page 20. Page 20 is the breakdown of your business type activities. and also your internal service fund. The, both water and sewer, again, presented on the accrual basis, so there, in here is going to be your fixed assets, also your long-term debt. Would say that your only long-term debt is really in your water fund, so looking at your business-type activity, as compared to a lot of places in New Hampshire when I go, there really is no significant debt to your water and sewer. And if you continue all the way down and you look at your total net position for the water, it's the last number, $14,261,704, and then your sewer, $7,652,000. Both are in very, very healthy. Both the water and the sewer did have the same impact for the net pension liability. Certainly not to the degree that the city and the school, but they received their proportionate share. In fact, the water fund is, again, if you were to go to the retirement system, they have a separate line. There's a separate line for the city, the school, and the water, so it's easy to identify. The sewer would have been an allocation based on, I believe, using the actuarial numbers on the OPEB. I'd have to recheck that. But the end result is both net positions are in a very good position, and there's really no outstanding debt to either of these programs. So that's a significant highlight to point out. I'd like to turn the page to page 21. Page 21 is your profit and loss for your business type activities. Again, it differs then when you're looking at it from a budget perspective, because one of the key pieces in here is right in the middle. It's depreciation costs. And if you look in the water fund, depreciation cost was $745,407. Again, that's typically not budgeted for. You really budget for your cash flow out, which was your bond payment, which was approximately $75,000. So when you're looking at it, the depreciation is significant. Likewise with the sewer fund, which had no debt, the bottom line was impacted by $429,045 worth of depreciation costs. If we look at the change in net position for the water fund, it was under, meaning bracketed, $91,244. However, the sewer was $594,713. Again, both positive when you take into consideration the effective depreciation into these numbers and where the rates are. What isn't presented here is the budget versus actual for the water and sewer fund. From a budget versus actual, the water was a positive $104,212, and then the sewer fund was a positive $659,339. That would be comparable to just what we talked about with the general fund, taking into consideration just the budgeted expenditures versus the budget, not taking into account, it's really about the cash flow in and out. So both of those programs are holding their own as far as that's concerned.
Councilor Littman?
So I just want to make sure the public doesn't get the wrong impression with respect to the sewer fund, because I think in terms of the adjustments we made to rates were based on the level of future expected investments into the aged structure. And so as I understood where we made our rate changes, we were significantly behind where we needed to be with respect to being able to maintain the existing infrastructure.
Yep, that's a great point. And so the council at the time did a 3 increases annually over a 3-year period. The final increase just actually started with sewer usage this past July 1, so this fiscal year not reflected in here. But if you recall, we were eating into our reserve within that enterprise account because we weren't collecting enough to offset the bills. You can see now, even after the depreciation, the number is about $594,000, to the good. Change in net position, and again, we've got the final increases already implemented. So beyond here, we will, continue to monitor and bring you recommendations, but we certainly stabilized that from utilizing sanitary sewer fund balance without replenishing it. And we were seeing that reserve drop fairly quickly, and the adjustments certainly have gotten us back onto a good course again.
But some of that also was for, the increase was also for the Winnipesaukee Basin capital projects.
And that's all tied into
Yeah.
the rates in that account, so even though that's,
There's a lot of capital that they want to
and
do.
that was the anticipation, we were trying to smooth out any increases and be reactive in a responsible manner, rather than all of a sudden, have a major impact. So, the Winnipesaukee River Basin Program has smoothed out their capital outlay projections over the next 5 or 10 years, which makes them more predictable, which allows us to be more predictable with our rates. But as you've heard the Water Department say, they are selling fewer and fewer units due to conservation and improved technology and other items. Obviously, we collect sewer for the most part based on water consumption. So just keep that in mind, that we are selling fewer units of water these days as well.
Right.
And would say that the last time I did present, I believe in particular, the sewer rates were considered a management letter at that point in time for the city to look at the rates, because the expenditures that were being done the rates weren't supporting that. So the city has taken that action, and over time it is building something. Just to elaborate a little bit, excuse me, from a rate standpoint, they were right within the budget. A lot of the savings happened on the expense side. The rates were within the actual versus the budget were within approximately $35,000. A lot of this is coming from the expenditures being saved for various reasons. So just like to comment on that. If you would turn to page 23, please. Page 23, the statement of fiduciary net position. I don't have a lot to say. It's included in the city's financial statements, but the private purpose trust funds really represent amounts on your MS9, which are held by your trustees, the cemetery funds and those types of things that are used for specific purposes. And then your agency funds are primarily made up of your student activity funds, and then your escrows that are purposed there, which really aren't city funds. And that's why they're over in this fiduciary fund. Again, I don't have a lot to say, because they're maintained by others, and they're really set for specific purposes. So that would conclude really the numbers presentation. I'm going to go over the management letter briefly, but I always like to point out at this stage where we did take some time to talk about the statement of net position, and in particular the pension liability. But sometimes I feel that this discussion really doesn't give credit where credit's due when we're talking about this document, and we've summed it up in maybe more than a half hour of really talking about the numbers. But the actual work that goes into prepare this document on the city side, because as the auditors, we help compile the information. We come in and we ask a significant number of questions, have them pull out a ton of documents, but it's really the city and the entire staff, including the school, including the water, they all join together to help really create this document. So while I've been able to stand here and certainly just read the numbers and give you an explanation as to how they occurred, it was really the city staff that really put this document together. So I always like to point out that hard work, because in talking with Scott, there weren't any issues about getting any of the information. Things were timely. Questions were received. Questions were answered. My understanding was it was a very smooth process this year. So I just really wanted to point that out.
Well, and if I could interrupt you for just a second, I would like to pass on the council's thank you to two people who were in attendance tonight, and that would be Mrs. Woodeman, and also to Raquel McCutcheon, who I believe is in our audience tonight also, for her help and assistance in this. So I just wanted to mention a couple names there, if I could.
Perfect. Last document going to talk about is the management letter.
That's at the front of the document.
I'm sorry.
After the first page, too.
Yeah.
The first page.
The real page one.
I don't think I have it in mine,
Don't have it in yours.
no.
Let's see. You don't.
No.
Okay. That's okay. I can certainly speak to it. I was planning on it, and I can really kind of paint a picture. Okay. I thought you didn't have it, no?
That's in Scott's.
I'm special.
Gotcha. So if we turn to page 3. Page 3 at the top, it says prior year recommendation. There's only one comment. Just want to make sure we're all looking at the same. All right. First and foremost, when we talk about the management letter, we're looking at things that were instances or areas that we really need to bring to the governing body. There's certainly recommendations. There's also notifications. And there's sometimes what we would call material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, depending on the level of what we found that we needed to point out. And happy to say that there are no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in this management letter. There's one prior year, and then there's a couple of new ones. So I'm going to go over them. The monitoring and improved departmental receipt procedures. Based on testing, we didn't feel that it was fully implemented. But certainly in looking at the city's response, it's an ongoing, it's something that, because there's multiple departments, things are being looked at in depth, and it's already ongoing. So it was a comment last year, coming full circle. There's a lot of things that are happening. My understanding, in looking at that, several of the steps were taken, and would look to see that the city would continue building on those receipt procedures. We didn't find any we didn't find any problems with money missing. Let's just say that. That's an easier way to look at it when we're talking about departmental receipts. That's the big thing. It's really procedural stuff. A lot of the ticking and the tying and the paperwork, signatures, just some general process that could be improved from where it stands now. So that's really the key piece of that. There was no huge issue there. It was money missing. We go on to the current year recommendations. Improved trust fund accounting. What we found was that when we were looking at the city's general ledger as compared to the MS9, in some instances, maybe it wasn't caught up to where it needed to be, and in certain cases, certain amounts were netted down. And what this recommendation is to really for the city and the finance office to review it potentially on a more regular basis, use the gross transactions so that they're not netted down, and it'll just provide a clearer audit trail. Again, not a significant deficiency or material weakness or recommendation. We were able to create the document, financial statements with an unmodified opinion. Improved capital project fund monitoring. There's certainly a lot of activity in the city of Laconia. And while there are current processes in place to monitor each and every one of those capital projects individually on Excel schedules in the finance office, the recommendation is that potentially they expand on that process by indicating funding revenue and other things that could be potentially improved upon to, again, provide a clearer audit trail and maybe make the ease of accounting a little bit easier. But there are schedules that exist. Those schedules were used in the audit. The recommendation is to potentially expand upon that. Perform airport risk assessment. This year, in discussion with Scott, he indicated that the airport took over more of the record keeping that had been in the past. So there was a change in process from years past where the airport is now in charge of their own bookkeeping, more so than it had been. Certainly with that comes the idea that if they're doing that, is there segregation of duties over there? Yes, the process just changed. Has the city evaluated that the segregation of duties issues would be looked at over there? So, our recommendation is to perform that risk assessment to see how their process and the procedures are over there now that it's changed from the prior years. And then the final one, number 5, another new pronouncement, if you will, preparing for the new single audit requirements. There's a lot of bullet points here. The bottom line, though, it's going to impact the city, the school, and even the airport, because the airport has the airport improvement grants that are federally funded. And under the new uniform guidance, under the from the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, the A133 requirements have now been expanded upon and further detailed than they were in the past. Primarily, this new single audit requirement will come in effect for June 30, 2016 for those federal programs that would be tested. The idea is that they're really looking for written and documented procedures. It is really at the heart of it, that even though the process may be strong, they really almost want a book on the shelf, if you will. Certainly, there's some other things in here, but essentially, they really want everything written and documented as a policy and procedure. Not that anything was wrong as we've been looking at the single audits, but this is, again, across the country as far as the standard that's going to be coming down for all those entities that do receive federal funding, that do require a single audit. They will be tested against these almost checklist type of audits, if you will. We would still do the additional testing, but one of the things would be just simply a yes or no. Is there a written policy on some things? A lot of those things are bulleted. A lot of this is going to come down to the different departments to make sure that they do have it. There isn't a standard template that can be just issued to you, here you are, but I'm sure that some of that is coming out, and we would certainly be more than willing to assist in any way we can as an audit firm as soon as we do get any kind of new information or types of policies that other people have created. A lot of people are waiting for the wheel to be passed, if you will, because no one wants to create it. So that would wrap up the management letter.
A question from Councilor Lippman.
What do you see in your practice with respect to how governing boards monitor the implementation of the recommendations with respect to the management letters?
There is a wide array, depending on whether we're talking to a board of commissioners, to board of selectmen, to city council, exactly how active they are at looking at these comments. There are some that will look at it and they will just file it away, and they're not worried. There are some that are very active and want to see that those prior year comments are falling off. So we'll follow up with management to see how it's going. So it's really town to town, city to city, as far as how active at this level you would get into the management letter.
I'll follow up on this, if I can direct this to the manager and Donna. So sometimes in this sphere, it's helpful to, departments may be a little not prioritizing getting certain things documented. Would it be helpful to you to have some sort of reporting back to us in terms of the status of the implementation of addressing the things that need to be documented? Because I'm sure it doesn't all fall within the finance area.
We try to respond and react to what the auditors are requesting us to do. And some of these, like Pat mentioned, we did implement some of the changes, and we need to get out there. The airport we knew was going to kind of come up and be an issue. As far as the single audits go, how many? We had, 10 single audits this year? 10 different? We had a significant number of single audits this year across all entities, between the school and the city and the airport, which was it was like twice the number than what they expected to have. Now, obviously, that varies from year to year, but I don't disagree that we can try to implement some sort of procedures and try to document so that there are certain steps that can be followed.
Go ahead.
I guess my question is more, so the finance department has a certain prioritization of getting sort of controls documented, which may be different than operating departments. And I guess what my direct question is as a tool to encourage participation in getting it done timely, would you find it helpful to have some sort of status reporting back to us on this If not, you can say no.
I think we can do that maybe halfway through. Obviously, we've got this, so maybe around the end of the year, talk about what changes have gone forward. Certainly, I mean, we don't have a shy finance department, and the fact that if another department is not providing, deposits timely, providing backup information, or missing the signatures, we'll do that. But I think we can probably put to some kind of a status update from these recommendations and just bring the council up to speed, a couple times a year as to what we're doing toward that without any problem.
Yeah, well, I don't think any of these are that significant. It's more than we've had recently, right?
And again, when we say the airport had some challenges, nothing in a bad way, just it was a transition off of our books and handling more. An employee changed over there, and it was a time to, move that employee, that position off of our health insurance and a few different things and put some oversight there, because it was kind of a unique relationship where they were kind of an agency but a standalone entity at the same time. So it's...
You're being kind. We were asked to leave. I'm also the chairman of the airport authority, so we were asked to find services elsewhere.
Well, I was trying to neaten up our audit over here on our end, so.
Councilor Hamel.
Donna, you said that we had twice as many single audits as we normally have. How were those triggered? Or
The dollars, correct?
Yes. It's triggered at any point and this threshold will go up to $750,000, but the city can still expect to be audited because of primarily a lot of the school federal grants are above $750,000 within themselves.
We also had money for the bridge. That was the grant. We had money, the airport had some improvements going on there. We had
so do they come in and verify the grants and the expenditures and things like that? And
They
the
do,
accounting
actually.
things, the accounting lines and...
The team is actually working on the single audits right now. I know Paul met with one of the folks from Mellinson last week to go over all the paperwork on the bridge, and they've been over to the school, and I think they just have to wrap up over at the airport, and they will go through and check to make sure that everything is in order and that all the documentation is there and have all the support.
So if they get if it goes over that figure that you're saying, then they automatically come and...
And we would have to look at any programs typically over $300,000. So if they hadn't been audited within a 2-year time frame, they would be considered high risk because they haven't been looked at. So that would be where the extra single audits came into play, because of the different projects that were over $300,000 in themselves have to be looked at. And it's a mini audit, and you're spot on. We're going to look at the grant. We're going to look at the expenditures. We're going to look at the drawdowns. And then depending on the grant type, it may have some what we consider special tests that are unique to it. And then basically pull that information together. And another report would be done if there was any question cost over $10,000. That might be put in it, or some sort of procedural item. It would be more of a management letter type of thing. But it's looked at each individual one.
So federal grants or state grants or whatever?
Just federal.
Oh, just federal.
Just
Okay.
federal.
Okay.
When the single audit comes out, there'll be a list of all of the grants that are in there.
Yeah. So if they're below that level, then they're not audited until we do a yearly audit?
If they're below $300,000, generally they're not looked at. The process begins with the totality. If the city as a whole, city, school, water, airport, in totality spent over $750,000, then we would have to look at least 25% of those expenditures.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a grant for 700, it's a total of them?
Yes, anything, once the city expends a total of, all combined,
Yep.
that triggers the initial test, and then
So
from
it could
there,
be a $5,000 grant up to $100,000. If they go over that figure, you check them all, or a percentage of them?
we would check a percentage of the total, typically 25%, and we would begin with those programs that have at least expended $300,000.
Okay.
So,
But full discretion of the auditors to come in and pick and choose. We're not handing them which ones we want them to look at. It's random, and they can always, always go above that threshold should they want to develop, a pattern or a trend.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
Very good.
Are you all set?
I'm all set. Thank you for inviting me in this evening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.
Nice job, Pat, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I just want to point out with the, with the money that was unspent with the budget, I mean, I know Donna and Raquel and pulling the numbers together with the audit do a great job, but that really translates across all departments when you look at the budget. Just on the city side, over $400,000 was returned unexpended that flowed into the general fund, and that's, all department heads are involved in managing their own budgets on an ongoing basis, so certainly credit to them as well for, having good prudence in managing their individual departments over the course of the year.
A question for Councilor Lippman?
I know we went long on this, but I think there's a lot of good information in the back that maybe Donna could, or you could walk us through at another meeting, just.
Sure.
I think statistical information and the descriptive information about the trends.
Yeah, we can highlight a few of those and bring them up at the next meeting.
I was just, one quick thing, I was just happening to look, the bond, total bonds, is that what we, 41 million, is that the total?
That's not net of assistance,
That's what I'm trying to find out if,
That's gross obligation.
gross obligation.
Which page are you on, Councilor?
Page 41.
yeah, I couldn't remember what page I saw it on, I was flipping through and I happened to notice that one.
What page are you on?
41. Gross obligation, are you saying, is that interest included? Is that what you mean by that, Henry?
It doesn't include the, like, from the school.
State aid
Building,
education.
building aid.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, I think an interesting one, page 73, that just is an interesting, shows,
72.
73, shows the percent of debt to the total budget has actually stayed pretty constant the last 4 years. And it's less than, before we undertook some of the larger projects.
I think it was last year, they said we were using less than 10% of our allowable.
Yeah, there's an exhibit on that, too, and that's
Page 71.
71. What we could borrow as a city is like 58 million, and we're at 14.7. And
I've always wondered where those numbers came from.
That's a nice number.
Actually, those numbers come from page 70, where it takes your assessed value and takes, as a percentage of,
Yeah, I didn't mean where we, I meant
Oh.
where whoever wrote the law came up with those numbers. That's what it was.
they were being very generous.
Yes.
Well, in this day and age, with one large school project, especially brand-new construction for a high school of a community of a decent size, can easily run $80, $90, $100 million. So when you start looking at, the allowed amount of assessed value, it's up there.
those are the kind of charts I think are good too.
And we've got the CAFRA up on the website, or if not, it is on. So this document is available online for anybody looking for it.
It's also at the library, and Mary has a copy in the clerk's office.
Okay, we ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay, mayor's report, a couple of things tonight. One, mentioned at our last meeting that beginning of new council terms, the mayor needed to make committee appointments and liaison appointments, and so I will formally do that tonight. No changes.
Can I ask a question? I don't know if this will be appropriate or not.
Probably not, but go ahead.
I would like to not just attend, but until we resolve, I know I'm being pushy, but until we resolve the parking garage, I want to be part of your committee, Bob. I don't want there to be 3, I want there to be 4, so that we can have a healthy disagreement and a tie vote.
It should be me.
I don't know if we can change things like that.
I don't know,
You
is that-
can- you can come, you're welcome to come sit in the audience,
I know that.
or even sit at the table, I don't care.
Yeah, I think formally,
If we
It is a
can, we
bad
can handle
number.
this informally and all of that, but I'm just telling you, I'm like really kind of
We'd have to take a
disappointed that
vote
the
on that.
roof is
before-
falling down, the sky is falling.
I think everybody around the table's having a problem with it, but, you know.
so you long for a position on the Land and Buildings Committee? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Well, I wouldn't quite put it that way, Mr. Mayor.
Is
I
that
would
governed
like to
by-
be-
Is that governed by?
I would like to be participatory in some way on the Land and Buildings Committee. I know that it's all going to come back to report to the council, and I get to be participate in that way. I get all that. So
We
I'm
have a
just giving
meeting.
I'm just giving you a fair warning, like a shot across the bow or something like that.
When we have meetings, you're more than welcome to participate.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you, Bob. That's all.
Voting,
come to the
probably
meeting.
not.
It does
I
bring
think
up a
it has to be in
procedural
the
question that
committee.
I don't know the answer
But-
to, and that is the fact that we have 3 members on each of our subcommittees. Is that governed by council rule? So
I'm
we-
wondering, does it state that in the,
Yes.
yeah,
Council study committees shall consist of 3 council members appointed by the presiding officer. We have to change our
Can
council
we-
rules in order to change.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. That's what I thought.
You can't vote, but you can come and listen.
But it's,
can't
it's
vote.
clearly been very informal over the years, and since that other counselors show up to the meetings, there's not usually an issue with them participating.
smart in her old age.
I think all of our committees err on the side of including any public comment, whether it's a citizen or another city councilor who doesn't serve on that committee. When it comes to a vote, it's just the committee members, but again, ultimately, the full council has the final say.
Exactly.
Okay, as far as the standing committees are concerned, the mayor would appoint the Finance Committee to again be chaired by Counselor Lippman and include Counselors Hamel and Bear. Public Safety Committee to again be chaired by Counselor Bear and to be accompanied by Counselors Doyle and Bounds. The Government Operations and Ordinances Committee to be chaired by Counselor Doyle with participation from Counselor Bolduc and Bounds on that committee. The Public Works Committee to be chaired by Counselor Bolduc with Counselor Bear and Bounds on that committee. And the Land and Buildings Committee to be chaired by Counselor Hamel, also including Counselors Lippman and Bolduc. And as far as the liaison assignments are concerned, these are the ones that I have a list of, which would continue. Belknap Economic Development Council is Counselor Lippman. The Human Relations Commission is the mayor. The Library Trustees is Counselor Bear. The Police Commission is Counselor Bear. The Parks and Recreation Commission is Counselor Hamel. The Planning Board, most importantly, is Counselor Bounds.
I love it when you lie to me like that.
No, I'm not lying. I mean, I think,
Good job.
I think of all the assignments, that is the most important one and the one that cannot be changed. Motorcycle Week Association is Counselor Bolduc. Water Commission is Counselor Bolduc. Lakes Region Public Access Television, Counselor Hamel. Capital Improvements Commission, Committee, I believe we only have 2 representatives on that now, and that is Counselor Doyle and Counselor Hamel. Is that correct? The Heritage Commission is Counselor Doyle, and the WOW Trail Board is, I'm the current liaison there, and the Muskrats baseball team, our liaison is Counselor Hamel. So that's the list, and I'll make that official that those appointments are made for the next 2 years. The other thing I would like to mention, remind the council and inform the public that the council has a goal-setting session scheduled for a week from Friday, which is February 5th, from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Central Fire Station. We're going to take advantage of the new community room facility at the fire station and have that meeting there. The meeting will be facilitated by 2 representatives of Primex, And that is a public meeting of the council, so it's open to the public, and I believe department heads, not all department heads, but some department heads will be in attendance, as well as the counselors and the facilitators and administrative staff. And
In
so
times again?
the press is certainly welcome to attend, and any members of the public who wish to would also be welcome. So that is a week from Friday, February 5th, 1 to 4 p.m. And I will send out I received a communication today from the facilitators, and I will send out an email to each of you counselors with your homework assignments. They'll be brief, so not a lot of time will be necessary to be spent on that. But he would like us all to come
I haven't done
prepared.
homework in a long time.
I've been waiting.
Counselor Bear is ready and waiting.
Only 4, though.
Yeah, your big issue will be trimming down your list, I think, probably. Okay. So we're not going to meet again. Our next council meeting is the Monday after this meeting, so we won't be gathered again before that on the 5th. Speaking of committee reports, I don't think we have any tonight that I'm aware of. Anybody? How about liaison reports? Any liaison reports tonight?
You all know that the applicant withdrew his application for the tree.
The tree.
Yes, that's my only report.
That brings up the city manager's report. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Included in your agenda for the second meeting of the month, we have the project updates report. Kind of in a little bit of a lull here, being the winter season, and a lot of projects having wrapped up, including the Main Street Bridge, which you've got on your agenda a little bit later tonight to sign off on the final project completion. We are working on our street paving list for next construction season, so we're hoping to have that finalized sometime in late February, early March, so we'll put that out there when we get that. That's actually one of the statistics, if you looked in your audit books about a number of things, enrollment and stuff, it talks about miles of roads that are paved, and this past 12-month cycle for the audit, I think the number was 5.67 miles in that fiscal year. So if you look at some of the prior years, we had done in the area 3.5 miles. One of the years when we did Union Ave, it was relatively small because that was such a comprehensive project. So we're going to try to keep on that trend of having the 5.5 to 6 miles paved annually. I spoke about the big Lakeside Avenue project, which we are working the planning stages right now with the hopes of getting it in the budget as a debt finance project. There'll be components of it that are in the general fund, as well as water, maybe a little bit of sewer, obviously some drainage will be general fund. I know staff met with representatives of Eversource last week. I shared with you that if we were ever going to bury utilities underground, we ought to do the assessment right now and determine what that cost is, and depending on what the cost and the desire, how we could fund that going forward. Don't have the final numbers yet, but Eversource was a great participant in that meeting, and we expect to have those numbers for you over the next week or two. So be happy to share those with you when we get them. Fire department, I know Councilor Hamel reported a couple of weeks ago, but the general contractor is completely off-site at this point to be back in the spring with a couple of minor punch list items. We'll be scheduling an open house date for the station in the near future. The other item that is in your packet is the update on the recycling solid waste costs. We're reporting that out quarterly now, so we're 6 months of the way through this fiscal year, comparing the same period a year ago at this time. Just in real quick numbers, the total tons of municipal solid waste that was collected in the same 6-month period in 2014 was at 1,976 tons. We're at 2,015 tons, or an increase of 38 tons over a 6-month period, which is relatively small percentage-wise. In terms of dollars, the cost to dispose of waste over this 6-month period is running about $6,000 ahead or more of where we were last year at this time. So again, we always encourage recycling either at your curbside or in the remote locations. And I will conclude my report and entertain any questions or comments if there are any.
Any questions or comments for the manager? Councilor Bear.
Can I congratulate you on your accession to chairman of the New Hampshire Municipal Association.
Thank you very much.
You're now the chairman, right?
I am the chairman. Thank you for that.
I read your first article in your town.
I'm
and,
published now.
Yeah, you're
The
published.
lighting on that photograph wasn't good.
We run a shoestring budget down there.
Anyone else? Okay, we're on to new business. We have 2 items of new business tonight. The first of which is a first reading of Resolution 2016-02 relative to the acceptance of donations from Spinnaker Cove Yacht Club from the Black Brook geothermic study in the amount of $500 and request to schedule a public hearing on February 8, 2015 during the regular city council meeting. Mr. Myers, would you like to brief us on this, please?
Yes, this was a donation from the Yacht Club towards a ongoing Black Brook geomorphic study, and that deals with the flow of water and the course of streams, and that being a tributary that starts over in Guilford, comes down behind the McDonald's on Union Ave, and enters into Paugus Bay, very close to our water source. I think if you recall, maybe several months ago now, the town of Guilford also made a contribution towards that study, knowing that, as the water flows down that brook, it does start in Guilford, so they certainly see the value in doing something, at least on a shared basis, regionally toward that. So this is one of those donations in a small amount, but regardless of that, we need to move it to a public hearing in order to advertise it and then formally accept it in 2 weeks.
Any questions or comments before we get to motions? Okay, the first motion that would be in order would be to move a reading of Resolution 2016-02 in its entirety and to complete the first reading by title only.
So,
Moved by Counselor Bear, seconded by Counselor Hamel. Any discussion? All those in favor of not reading the resolution in its entirety, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative, and that motion carries. Next up, a motion would be in order to move a first reading of the resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to accept donations on behalf of the city for Spinnaker Cove Yacht Club for the Black Brook geothermologic study in the amount of $500 as presented, and to schedule a public hearing on February 8, 2015 during the regular council meeting. Moved by Counselor Bolduc, seconded by Counselor Bear. Any discussion?
Just for housekeeping, we have a typo there, so we really ought to be saying 2016. I apologize for that.
I'm sorry. Public hearing on February 8, 2016. That motion was made by Counselor Bolduc and seconded by Counselor Bear. Is there any discussion of passing the resolution on first reading and scheduling public hearing? All those in favor, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative, and that resolution is passed on first reading, and the public hearing is scheduled. Next item of new business is City Council action granting approval for the mayor or city manager to sign a certificate of final completion of work required by the state DOT related to the rehabilitation of the Main Street Bridge. And again, there's a number of pages of paperwork in your packet on that subject, and I'll again ask the city manager for a briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You can see the memo from Public Works Director Paul Moynihan outlining the cost on the participatory bridge construction, the bridge engineering cost, the non-participatory, which was the ornamental lighting, the bump outs, and a little bit of widening, and as the council knows, that that's an opportunity to invest some relatively small dollars to do a little bit better job. The Gateway Park construction is there. That wasn't specifically part of any state or federal dollars for the bridge program, but it's listed there because some of that was shared cost in the sense that we used some of the same contractors for some of the work, so it was listed there. So you see the grand total of the $3.718 million for all phases, and this is saying that we got the sign off on that the owner, the city as the owner, accepts the project complete, and this is part of the state requirements for doing it with the Bridge Aid program through the state of New Hampshire.
Any questions? Counselor Hamel.
As part of the certificate of final completion, there's a page that says there's a final payment of $2,608.94. Is that what's left on that?
Yes, as of this date when this was done, I'm not sure if it's been paid yet, but that was the final reimbursement amount we were expecting at that point, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll get to the motion. A motion would be in order to move that the city council grant approval for the city manager to sign the certificate of final completion of work required by the State Department of Transportation related to the rehabilitation of the Main Street Bridge in Laconia. I have that motion by Councilor Lippman, seconded by Councilor Bounds. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor of granting this authority to the city manager, please raise a hand.
Aye.
I have 6 votes in the affirmative, and that motion carries. Thank you. Unfinished business. We have 2 items of unfinished business tonight, both of which were placed on the table at our last meeting. The first of which was consideration of an unsolicited offer from Mr. Harry Bean to purchase city-owned property on Davis Place. And before we get to making motions, I'm going to ask the city manager to please brief us on new information in your packet that was not available at the last meeting.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the mayor said, this item was tabled at the meeting 2 weeks ago. The council gave me some guidance to respond back to the Beans regarding their offer and thoughts about the dollar amount, as well as including some of the professional services. So you do have a letter signed by Harry Bean, which keeps the offering price still at $1,000, but indicates that he would be willing to pay for any surveying and also any title or deed work that needs to be done. There's a question about whether or not with some land transactions between the Laconia Housing Authority and the city for the Scott and Williams building, whether some of that parcel needs to be remain intact for overflow parking. So we just want to make sure that we're staying consistent with any deed restrictions that may be on that. Also in your packet, you have a memo from Director of Planning, Shanna Saunders, and this came out of a question from the City Council 2 weeks ago, asking to clarify, what, if anything, could be constructed just on the portion that Mr. Bean is looking to acquire. So in the memo, it does reference that just again, based on that parcel right now, is within the 75-foot wetland buffer area along Jewett Brook. According to state RSAs, within this area, no vegetation can be removed or altered without a conditional use permit, and they reference per RSA 235-17H, and also that water body buffers shall be retained and maintained in their natural condition. Any structure would remove or alter the vegetation and thus would need a conditional use permit, and even a small shed. So the lot as a standalone, just based on its proximity to the brook, does fall under state statute and would need a conditional use permit for any criteria. So I can't say 100% that nothing could go there, but as it stands today, it would not qualify on its own.
How do you get that? Is that through the planning board or the state, the CUP?
The conditional use permit is through the planning board. Any disturbance within the buffer.
Because that's all he apparently wanted to clean up and remove, and that's all vegetation.
And I indicated that there was any dead to Mr. Bean, and I think Mrs. Bean as well was in attendance, that if there was any fallen branches, a tree that had tipped over, that type of stuff could be removed, but they would have to comply with state law regarding cutting or trimming any living vegetation, as well as potentially even pulling out stumps or roots and that type of stuff. I don't claim to be an expert, but I know that even if a tree had fallen and it was just a stump base, they couldn't be pulling stumps because of erosion and what the root system is holding into it. So for anybody anywhere who's within that buffer, you should exercise extreme caution, and when in doubt, check with planning staff and/or the state of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services.
So from a procedure standpoint, this is currently on the table after our last meeting. So if we wish to discuss this in detail tonight, let alone make any motions, we need to bring it off the table for that discussion. So the first order of business would be to ask if there is any member of council who would move at this point to bring this matter off the table.
Is it appropriate to discuss anything at this point in time?
I'm sorry?
Is it appropriate to discuss anything about the status of this at this point in time?
Well,
Just asking.
okay, I think the way we have worked over the last year or so is to allow a certain amount of council discussion before we get to making motions, and that seems to have worked well, so I'm not opposed. Technically, that may not be to the letter of the law in terms of Robert's Rules of Order, but I think it's not inappropriate for us to have a general discussion before we get to making motions. But certainly no other motion would be germane
Okay.
at this point, other than to take it off the table.
If I get out of line, just tell me, and I'll shut up, okay? I'm not necessarily opposed to this, but I have a lot of questions. I understand that there's been another offer made by Mr. Wiley for at least portions of the tract of land that abuts this property that we sort of rejected, I think it was 2 years ago.
Actually, it's part of the same property, is it not?
Lot 59.
It's part of the same lot.
Part of the same lot, but it's, yeah. And I have no idea of what the fair market value of this lot is. I have no idea what the whole lot is worth, what the partitioned lot would be worth, and I'm just reluctant to get into plunging forward with sales unless we get some kind of an appraisal, some kind of an assessment of what the value of this land is. I mean, this is not the way to do business. We don't just come up with a price on a piece of property and say, no.
Well, we haven't come up with a price. It's an unsolicited offer, so,
Well, we don't accept a price.
okay.
So that's my initial discussions about all of this.
Let me make one other observation here. I know Mr. Bean is in the audience tonight, and we're still working the kinks out on our new agenda format here and whatnot, and it just occurred to me that one of the things that's missing from this agenda is soliciting comments from the audience on items that are on tonight's agenda. And so we skipped over that, and so I would, at this point, with the indulgence of the council, I would invite Mr. Bean to come forward if he cares to, and address the council on this matter.
I'm Harry Bean from Guilford. I guess I'm here to answer questions you might have. The particular piece of property that you were referencing, there's a parking area in the middle of this flat, open field for all practical purposes. And the gentleman that you was talking about wanted to buy the field area, which would make it so that you couldn't make the parking lot bigger. The piece of property that I want is just the woods, which is too close to the brook to put a parking area. It doesn't infringe on the parking area or the increase in size of it at all. And the reason that I want to buy the property is because it's become a dumping ground, and I own the building that's on the other side of the brook. I think I talked to some of you folks about people dumping TVs and stuff. If we started charging them at the dump, that's one of the places they're dumping them. There's a half a dozen TVs over there that are all busted up. Shopping carts are in there regularly. People are allowing their pets to use that as a bathroom. It's right beside the brook. Actually, there's been a couple of people that I've run off that thought that that would be a good place for a bathroom. So if I was to purchase that, I would kind of be the law enforcement to a certain extent, except for his part. And I guess that if there's any other questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Any questions right now? Councilor Hamel?
I've been over there a couple times, but I didn't bring a ruler with me. Are you just looking for where that wooded area is?
Just the woods.
Is
Just
there
the woods. I don't
anything
want any of the
beyond into
grass.
the parking lot at all?
I don't want to even get into the grass. I don't want to mow the grass. I'll let you guys keep mowing the grass.
Because,
If I've got the woods, I want to clean up. You know, there's some trees in there that are a liability issue for the city. There's trees that are like 15, 18 inches in diameter, and they're leaning like this. You get one of these people in there that isn't paying attention. I kind of hang out in the woods. I'm a hunter and stuff. You know, that can wind up being on his head. I don't know exactly what liability that would cost you, but I want to cut that up and get that out of there and just make it look nice. I think some of you have seen some of the other properties that my son and I have transformed, let's say. We've actually got a couple of awards from somebody down here, the city, for taking
On
something
Porch Ward, yes.
that's something that was an eyesore and turned it into something that isn't.
250 Mechanic Street.
Well, that's one of them. And the other one's down on Messer Street, down by the old Coke plant there. The place had caution tape around it for years, and now it's productive. It seems to be doing what it's supposed to do, producing tax money.
Okay, well, stand by, and if we need to ask any further questions, we'll call you back up, that's fine. So the issue that was on the table last time when we tabled this was whether or not to schedule a public hearing on whether or not we want to declare this to be surplus property, which would have to be the first step. And that's what we tabled. So what's the council's wish in terms of going forward? Do we want to discuss this more? Do we want to schedule that public hearing on declaring it surplus? You know, it's kind of like the discussion we had last year with regard to the Elm Street property, 21 Elm Street property, in the sense that we're not committing ourselves to any course of action by scheduling a public hearing on this if we want to. That's not a commitment on the council's part to take any positive action or not take any action.
Well, wouldn't it be premature to schedule it for a public hearing if we thought that it would be advisable to get some kind of an appraisal on this piece of property?
We have an assessment.
Well, and I think I think you raised some good questions, and I certainly have the same questions. And I'm probably not telling you all anything you don't know, but one thing that's puzzling to me is that there are four houses on Davis Place on the left-hand side of the street, the south side of the street there, before you get to the brook,
Yeah.
the last of which is the house that's now owned by Mr. Bean. And all of those houses are on lots that are roughly 1/10 of an acre in size, very small lots. And the city, for tax purposes, has each of those lots, not the houses now, the lots, assessed at around $30,000 for 1/10 of an acre.
Well,
And the land that Mr. Bean wants us to sell to him is about 2/10 of an acre in total, roughly. Now, it's not,
a buildable lot.
I'm sorry?
It's not a buildable lot.
It's not a buildable lot, but it also isn't a lot.
Right.
We're creating a lot.
so let me understand.
And that brings up the whole issue that the reason that those lots are valued at $30,000 apiece by the city is because there's already a house on them, therefore they are buildable lots. But so you can say even though the square footage that Mr. Bean is interested in, although twice as large, isn't worth near as much as those smaller lots are, because it's not buildable, but when packaged with the land next to it, which is undeveloped, it becomes more valuable, just by definition, right?
If you expand the size of your lot for the house that you've got, then it seems to me that you've increased the value of your home.
Well, and
So, I don't-
Mr. Myers can brief us on this, but I believe, we were talking about this earlier today, and he indicated to me that he had had a conversation with our assessor, who indicated that should we make this boundary line adjustment and include this new property onto the existing lot that Mr. Bean owns, it would increase the value of his lot, the taxable value of his lot, by approximately $10,000. Is that
I think it was 10,800 or 10,600, but yeah, greater
$10,800,
than
something like that?
Would that decrease the lot you're taking the land from?
I'm sorry?
Would that decrease the assessment on the land you're taking it away from?
It would slightly decrease it, because if that 2/10 of an acre was removed from it, yes, but the city owns that lot, so there's no taxes being paid on it
Is
currently
this
anyway.
one contiguous lot now?
It's a brook that goes through it.
There are actually two lots, so if you look at the map that's in your packet, the city owns all of what is highlighted in your packet. There is one large lot that just has the single wide stripe through it, and that lot starts on Davis Place. A part of it crosses the brook to behind Mr. Bean's property. It encompasses the kind of rectangle with the point piece below it that isn't hashtag, which runs out to Howard. And it also wraps around the piece that says City of Laconia on it, and goes all the way down, continues to run adjacent to the brook, and runs all the way down to the river, adjacent to the frontage on the river that Mr. Wiley does not own. So it crosses the brook, goes to the river, and cuts up the little tiny piece in the center that has the number 22 and says .15 acres, is also owned by the city. And for whatever reason, going back in history, we think it was acquired at a different time, so therefore, it's its own parcel with a different tax map ID number. Kind
So
of plunked
most
in
of the
middle.
land on both sides of the creek that Mr. Bean is interested in belongs to the same lot that goes all the way down to the river.
Right.
And then he wants a small slice of the next lot, 22, which the city also owns. And you had a reaction or a question?
That piece that I want to get, it isn't part of that. The small, it's just a small section there that goes over to the bridge.
Goes over the bridge.
The big lot does not contain that. Actually, I'm trying to get a small slice of that separate lot, because that's part of the woods. That's where they're dumping the TVs in the last 6 or 8 feet over there. You know, they don't back into the woods, they just back up to the woods and throw the TVs in there. They're still there. I think you saw them.
I think we're saying the same thing. When you look at the tax map ID numbers, it's two different parcels, both owned by the city, but it's...
But separate parcels.
Separate
parcels, yes.
Yeah.
So,
So the little skinny hashtag with the small X's above it, that actually is on a different city-owned lot.
But that's part of the wooded area.
this one up here.
Yes, the one that
Okay.
says 22.
So this is, in fact, what would be separating out.
The lower part with the wider lines that you're looking at is part of that big piece that runs to the river, adjacent to the brook, across the bridge, and out to Howard Avenue. So there'd be subdividing or doing a boundary line adjustment of that component of the larger lot, as well as a little sliver of a separately owned lot, also owned by the city, as referenced here as Lot 22. So it's a-
Lot
it's a piece-
22.
It's a piece of two different lots. It's not one lot in its entirety, neat and clean. We're taking a little
It's
a little
parts of
sliver
two
of
different
one.
lots.
Would we be transferring the land on both sides of the river?
Of
the
the
brook.
brook, where it's
Of the brook.
hashtag
Druid Brook.
behind it, yes.
Yeah.
So the intent would be, I believe, in layman's terms, where this boundary line adjustment is drawn, and this was not done by a survey, this is just for illustrative purposes, if you will. If we were to move forward, I think it's fair to say that we would want to make sure that the bridge stayed on city parcel, and no portion of the bridge got sold to Mr. Bean.
You have no interest in any
Just
part of
to
the
it.
bridge, right?
That additionally, thinking way ahead, we would want to put some kind of a maintenance or construction easement, should we ever have to go and perform work on the bridge, that we would have the right to be able to work on it from that edge of the property if we need to without disturbing Mr. Bean's property, but have access to be able to maintain the bridge
And
as well.
you had a reaction to the tax
Well-
assessment issue?
Yes, I did.
Use the microphone, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. When I first was interested in purchasing this property, we went, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be some crazy amount that they thought that it was worth. And they told us at the assessor's office that it'd be, they thought that it'd be worth between $6,000 and $7,000. And one other thing that hasn't been mentioned, we mentioned the fact that I was willing to pay $1,000 for this piece of property, but the survey and the attorney's fees are approximately $5,000. So that's $6,000. I thought that, they said 6,000 to 7,000. I thought that I made a reasonable offer. I'm not trying to steal it. I dabble in real estate, and I try to be fair.
So you believe the land is worth somewhere between $6,000 and $7,000?
That's what they told me at the assessor's office, and it made sense to me. And they said that that would be what my tax rate, my taxes would go up by $6,000 to $7,000 times the tax rate.
Well, if you were making this purchase in a private sector,
Well, it's not.
well,
Not to be
if you
rude.
were, and you wanted this land, wouldn't you negotiate at somewhere near the fair market value and understand that you'd have to pay the additional costs in order to secure the purchase? Wouldn't that be a fair approach to?
Well, I don't know. I thought that the fair approach would be to keep the property clean from all of the things that I mentioned earlier, plus put it on the tax rolls. It's not on the tax rolls now. It's of absolutely no use to anybody other than me. And it's just to keep it clean so that when I'm looking out well, actually, I'm not going to live there. My granddaughter's probably going to live there. When she's looking out the dining room windows, she won't be watching somebody over there urinating on a tree, because she'll call me and I'll go run them off. Or if it gets too drastic, I'll call a gentleman in the back row over there.
Thank you.
Okay, one at a time. Counselor Hamel here, please.
So basically, you're estimating, along with the resetting the boundary lines and whatever research needs to be done, $6,000 roughly?
That's what the surveyor told me. That's what he quoted me.
Oh, a surveyor told you that?
Yeah, the same surveyor that cut off that other piece of property for the guy that just built the 6-unit out there.
Mr. Wiley.
What's his name?
Wiley. Down on the river.
That's the guy with the 6-unit. It burned down, and he rebuilt it.
Mr. Wiley.
He surveyed all of that area. And so I called him. I figured, he's going to probably be the least expensive, because he just did most of that area, so he knows right what he's looking for. And he told me that it'd be approximately $5,000 between him and the attorney's fees.
Counselor Bolduc.
Yes, I just cannot imagine. You can't do anything with the piece of property. You can't build on it. You can clean it to a certain extent. And to me, we sold 2 pieces up there off Guilford Avenue, that sand pit that the city owned, for the same kind of money. And that was more desirable than this place. At least you can do something with the one off Guilford Avenue, but you can't do anything with this one other than to clean it. And I just cannot imagine what these people do in the city of Laconia and fixing up these old dump places, that, he's trying to do another thing here, clean it up, make it look good, stop all this junk from getting put in there. It's right next to the river, so the city would be liable for anything that goes in that river, the way it is today. And I think if somebody turned the city into the state, they'd probably have a problem there. We'd have to go clean it.
Any other comments or questions? Counselor Bear.
Is the city asking for an easement on this property?
An easement on what Mr. Bean is proposed to buy?
Yeah.
I don't see where we would need to, as long as the bridge stayed with the city. We own current access to the street, and we own all the way along the brook down to the river as well. So I don't know what we would need for an easement at this point, knowing that we still own the rest of it. unless I'm missing something here, an easement which would allow us
We
to,
would retain the rest, we would retain most of Lot 22, which gives us easement back out to the street.
That's right.
and we own the land in between where
If we
Lot
ever
22.
wanted to open that bridge for whatever reason again, this Lot
In
22.
Lot 59 that goes to the river.
Right, Lot 59 continues on the other side of Lot 22.
Right.
We still own
Right.
all of that right now as well, so
Right.
unless I'm missing something, I don't know what we would want an
Well,
easement
no,
for.
as was mentioned, I understand there has been an offer made for the rest of 59 or some part of it.
So,
But
so
with
yes,
the
late-
understanding, I think that they were asked if they would give the city an easement.
so late Friday afternoon, I had an appointment with Mr. Wiley, who had come before this city a year or so ago about purchasing some additional property adjacent to his lot where it had the fire and the 6 units were torn down. And at the time, the city entertained his offer and rejected selling it to him. He came back in to see me Friday afternoon, and I'm not sure if this being on the agenda and in the same proximity stirred his interest again.
Yeah.
Brought me an offer. It was Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, so it was too late to make it on this agenda, so you will see it in 2 weeks. He had offered either to buy the adjacent area just along the river or the remainder of Lot 59, which is
Right.
everything I already described,
After Mr.
except for a stretch where you could come across the bridge and stay straight ahead to go on to Davis Place. And he made that offer, and I can get it to you. In my conversation with him, while I was understanding, I pointed out to Mr. Wiley that the city has access across the brook by going down River Street. We already have an access on Victoria Place behind it, if a Riverwalk ever were going to go there. If we were to cross the brook, and I said, if the city were to consider this, just in collecting information, I said, would you have any interest in granting an easement to the city to be able to maintain and go across the frontage to stay along the river, if you will, as opposed to just cutting through the middle? And he indicated that he wasn't. So that was just the extent of my question, was trying to understand his full offer and see if he would have any interest in granting an easement.
Would that preclude a sale? Well, we don't want to get into that, I guess, but I understood, the mention of the fact that the city might want it for an extension of the Riverwalk. I wasn't aware that the city was interested in extending the Riverwalk.
I think just the fact that we had it at Victoria Place across the brook, and that easement leads right up to the bridge and we cross over, I thought it was a question worth asking, but it certainly is not a condition of sale. It's the city council's decision whether they want to sell that, part of it, all of it, if they want to ask for an easement as a condition of sale, or if it's not of importance. I was just looking for future options going forward.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
I'd like to make a motion, we move forward on this, though.
All right, good. Thank you. All right, so if we want to take any action tonight, the appropriate motion at this point in time would be to bring the matter of the purchase city-owned property on Davis Place off the table.
I'd make that motion, please.
That motion is made by Counselor Doyle. Is there a second? Counselor Bolduc seconds that motion. Although, all those in favor of taking this off the table, please raise a hand. I have 6 votes in the affirmative, so it is now back on the table. And any motion would be appropriate at this point in time, include to move to schedule a public hearing on February 8, 2016, during the regular city council meeting regarding the declaration of city-owned property on Davis Place as surplus. Moved by Counselor Bolduc, seconded by Counselor Doyle. Any discussion of that motion? All those in
Yes.
Counselor Bounds.
This is premature. We need an appraisal. We can't conduct business like this. We can't just pick property up and sell it without knowing what its value is, especially when we own what I understand now to be 2 lots or 3 down there.
Lot
Two
20,
lots.
Lot 22 as it stands in its entirety in front of you.
Yeah.
And Lot 59, which includes the hashtag that you see.
Counselor Bear has a map for you here.
This is lot.
But that wouldn't preclude us from getting an appraisal later, would it? just to declare it surplus.
22
It goes to a
encompasses
surplus.
all
Meeting
of this
to
and
declare it
some of
surplus,
this.
we could always get an appraisal.
Some of this
And
on the
we
other
know
side of the brook.
59 is,
We could do an appraisal as a condition of sale or
59
anything
is the yellow?
going further, yes.
22 is just this small little piece here.
I'm confused.
Counselor Lippman.
So holding a public hearing isn't the same as selling it, so I think if we want to hear if there's other interest or learn more about the situation, we can do that, and then if we feel that we want to progress to a different level of due diligence, we could do that as well.
Why couldn't we ask for an appraisal? And once we got the appraisal, schedule a public hearing at that point in time? Aren't we scheduling a public hearing without an appraisal? We won't have an appraisal by the time we have a public hearing on it. And it seems like there's no need to rush for glory here. I don't know what everybody's angst is to get this done. We could have an appraisal done of the entire area that we own, find out what it's worth, make some decisions about how it can best be used. We want to parcel off this little section right now for purposes of a public sale. We don't have... No, I think I'll put it simply. To schedule it for a public hearing now is premature. That means in 2 weeks it's going to come up. We're not going to have any more information. And already there are counselors here that want to see this sale go through. Without, just somebody comes in and offers us $1,000 and we say, that's a fair price. I'll take it. That's not the way to do business.
I don't think anybody's made that motion.
Counselor, I'm not sure that characteristic is accurate. And the reason is because when Counselor Bolduc made this motion at our last meeting, it didn't even get a second.
Right.
Wait.
There's a difference between holding a public hearing on this and soliciting public input and making a motion to actually do it.
Correct.
I understand there's a difference between doing that. I understand that. I get that. You understand that when you do a public hearing, you're not going to be able to give the public information about what the value of the property is? You're not going to be able to make any rational comments except we've been offered $1,000 plus the cost of transforming it? What do you think about that?
I think the same.
I think it's premature.
I think the same thing that happened on Guilford Avenue. We didn't get an appraisal. We sold it with the best offer. That was
Call
it.
the question.
If that's...
And that was better property than what's over here.
One at a time. Counselor Bound still has the floor.
I yield the floor.
Counselor Bolduc, do you have something further?
I just.
We're debating the motion, which is to schedule a public hearing.
Absolutely.
Counselor Doyle, did you have,
I
you
was
you want to
calling the
vote?
question,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, if there's no other further discussion, there's no reason to call the question. We'll have a vote. So the motion, the question, the vote is on the motion to schedule a public hearing on February 8th on this issue. All those in favor of scheduling a public hearing on whether to declare this property be surplus, please raise a hand. All those against? We have 5 votes in the affirmative, 1 negative. The motion carries, and the hearing is scheduled for February 8th. Thank you. Okay, the other piece of unfinished business, also on the table at this point in time, is a second reading of the resolution. Thank you. Which is in your packet. Resolution 2016-1. It's the final page on your packet tonight. Second reading of a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend grants on behalf of the city in the amount of $19,956.30 for Laconia DWI patrols. Now, one piece of additional information, we started our last discussion with what's new, and I believe that all of you on the council are privy to a confidential memorandum on this subject written to us by city attorney. Okay? Now, at the moment, that information is client-attorney privilege and not available to the public. We can keep it that way, or we could vote to make this information public as part of our discussion tonight. That's totally up to the council. We can refer to this memorandum in general description without detailing what's in it, without opening it to the public, but if we start quoting from it, then we need to make it public. Counselor Hamel.
Let's just be transparent.
I'll make a motion that we make the document public.
I'll second it.
Yeah.
All right, Counselor Hamel makes a motion to release to the public a confidential memorandum dated Thursday, January 21st, 2016, from Attorney Jay Whitelaw of the Mitchell Municipal Group of Laconia to City Manager Scott Myers regarding Resolution 2016-1 DWI patrols. And someone seconded it over here.
I did.
You did, I'm sorry, Counselor Bolduc. All right, any discussion of that motion? So we have a motion on the table to make public this memorandum from Jay Whitelaw to Scott Myers. All those in favor of making it public, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative, and that motion carries. So this memorandum is now part of the discussion. So what I'll ask here is, do we need any further questions or comments before we get to making motions?
Do we have to take it off the table?
So that's, the first motion would be to take this matter off the table. Counselor Bolduc, is there a second? Counselor Hamel seconds that motion. All those in favor of taking this matter off the table, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative, and that motion carries, and it is back as a germane subject. And let me get to my... Okay, so we had a first reading, we scheduled a public hearing, so all we're talking about now is the second reading of this resolution. Is there,
Do we have to waive a reading of the? We don't.
on the second reading, do we need to waive the reading of the entire resolution? Have to do that again? All right. So a motion would be in order to waive the reading of the entire resolution 2016-01 and read by title only. Moved by Counselor Bolduc, seconded by Counselor Bear. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. Vote is 6 in the affirmative, and we will read by title only. So the motion that would now be in order would be to adopt Resolution 2016-01, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend grants on behalf of the city in the amount of $19,965.30 for Laconia DWI patrols. Someone care to make that motion? Counselor Doyle, seconded by Counselor Bounds. All right, now we can have discussion of this resolution, and you're free, if you want, to make reference to the memorandum.
Call the question.
Anyone?
Should the letter be read, or do you?
Go in the middle.
I don't think we need to do that.
Okay. That was my
Any
only question.
discussion?
I think just the matters that were raised as questions with respect to whether the chief had the authority to apply for the grant, and whether the manager has the authorization to sign the agreement, that basically we now have council opinion that both of those things are in bounds.
Also, can I make a comment also?
Counselor Hamel?
Okay, also, according to the statement in the letter that that the grant cannot be sent to the police department, that it has to be sent to the city. That's in there.
That was a condition of the
and
grant,
yeah. Okay.
It will be accounted for separately. That's,
And I think you heard tonight from the auditor that all grants are done on randomly.
That's why I
and
asked those questions.
They're not off the books and in a little slush fund anywhere. They're fully accounted for.
any other discussion of this resolution? Okay, all those in favor of adopting the resolution, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative, and the resolution is adopted. Thank you.
Can I ask a question before we adjourn?
You may.
Back to the hearing on surplus property. Is it on the strip you're going to go, or is it on the entire 2 lots?
Has to be
Or
on,
are you declaring all of it surplus, or just what he's buying?
Just the area that was highlighted that he's made the offer
Just
on.
the area?
Yep.
So the other block is not going to be put up for surplus?
That was not what was requested. So the hashtag of 59, that's the small strip abutting the beans and goes across the backside of the brook, and the little strip of Lot 22 is all that was offered to purchase, so that's all that's being offered at the public hearing.
no complete lot, portions of 2 different lots.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. Any other council comments
I
tonight?
get-
Councilor
I'd
Hamlin?
like to ask Scott another question. In reference to what Dave stated about the assessment, is there a way that we could have that done on the complete lot and then maybe that separate piece? I mean, is there such a thing as, I don't want to say a 30,000-foot assessment, but is there like a quick assessment we could do to get a,
So you're talking about an appraisal,
yeah, that's what I meant, appraisal, I'm sorry.
and I don't claim to be an expert on appraisals, but I think an appraiser would probably come and look at it for its highest and best use, highest yield. So if somebody were to come in and look at Lot 59, they probably would look at the zoning, and based on the acreage and the setbacks and everything else, and I'm just making this up, they could determine that you could put in a 12-unit apartment building on that lot based on the acreage. And based on that, they would do an assessment, typically on its highest and best yield or best use. On the small parcel that Mr. Bean has requested a purchase, I think it would be a real challenge to find any comps or comparable properties to compare it to, because you're not comparing a buildable lot with a buildable lot, and how many little small carved-out standalone parcels are there going to be that really have any market value more to anybody who may be in a butter. This one is slightly different because he's requesting to carve off a piece from a larger piece that the city owns. It's not an orphaned piece that's kind of landlocked and really has no access. This does have street frontage. It's part of, and Councilor Bear, you may know, the acreage on Lot 59 is 1.5 acres or 2 acres or somewhere in that area in its entirety. So I don't know how easy of an appraisal the carved-out portion would be, and I don't think either person who's interested is talking about building it out to its highest and best use. So were we to get a price, it may blow it out of the water, just in my
Couldn't we get
non-professional
couldn't we get
appraisal.
an appraisal that would limit the, and maybe we can't in terms of comps or anything like that, but would just limit it to what the value of that slice of land is he wants to take out?
Counselor,
They
can you
can't
use
do
the
it?
mic? I can't hear you.
Okay. Couldn't we get an appraisal or an assessment or something that gives us an idea of what the fair market value is of that slice of land? It does have value.
Well, our assessor has said that based on the lots and whatever else, if this approximate 0.2 of an acre was added, it would add $10,800 in assessed value to Mr. Bean's current property, which now would all be in one parcel if this were to go through. So based straight on assessment with comps that we do, but that'd be very different than how an appraiser would look at either
I
a
understand
carved-out piece or the big piece. So that's the best number I have for you. I don't know what an appraisal would cost, but I would guess it's going to be to do the whole thing and then the portion on a challenging piece. I would think it's going to be a $1,500 to $2,000 expenditure to get an appraisal on that piece.
I mean, one of the issues here is that we're not appraising a lot because the lot doesn't exist. And,
It will exist when we're done,
well, but the
and then it'll have value.
it has value now, or it has value regardless, but I think what the city manager is trying to indicate, which I would agree with, is that an appraiser is going to want to look at the highest and best use of that property. and the highest and best as its value, and the highest and best proper value of that property is not to combine it with Mr. Bean's lot, because it's still only buildable for one house if you do that.
You can tell.
It's more valuable attached to the lot that it's already with, because you can do more with that
This is
lot.
not like Port Landing, and what we're looking for is we can give explicit instructions to the appraiser or whoever, and I think even the applicant might share in the cost, but we can give it explicit instructions to the appraiser. It says, look, we're the city of Laconia, this guy wants to buy this piece of property, given the property values, can you give us an idea of what that's worth?
No, because it depends on what you're going to do with it.
We know what he's going to do with it. This is not,
All he's gonna do is
Well,
clean.
you've already, okay, if that's the, and let's have an honest discussion about this. I mean, I understand your point, Counselor, but I think to that question, we already have an answer. $10,000.
well, then, to my concern, then what we've done tonight is a done deal. And we don't have an idea of what that value, of what that property is worth.
He just told you what it's worth.
You know, he gave me an estimate that's very unreliable of $10,800. Mr. Bean gives me an estimate of $6,000 to $7,000.
Well, his source was the same. I mean, we can have the source here in 2 weeks if that's what you want, right?
Yeah.
We can have, his source is the same as Mr. Meyer's source.
Taking Harry Bean's figures, then the real value to him is the $6,000 or $7,000 plus the cost of putting in all the, making the boundary line changes and everything else that he's got to do. That's the
Now,
real cost to him.
we could ask, what's the lot number?
59 and
59 in a
22.
sliver of 22.
59? That's the big lot?
Yes.
Okay, we could ask for an appraisal of lot 59, right?
Without that piece.
Okay, so we could get an
But
appraisal
anyway.
of lot 59, and then do the math and say, okay, lot 59 is worth X, and the portion of lot 59 that Mr. Bean wants to buy represents X number of percentage of that, and therefore his percentage of that lot is worth Y, right? That number is going to be higher, I would guess, than the $10,000 number, because, as you said, you could put an apartment building on that lot.
Already
you
assessed for
cannot.
89,000.
You cannot put an apartment building on that lot.
Hmm?
You can't put a, they
On
said you can't even.
59, you
On lot 59?
Not the one that Bean wants,
Oh,
the big one.
Yeah, the big one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the big one.
But the one that Bean wants, you can't do
Well,
anything
but
with.
that isn't a lot yet, Counselor.
It isn't a lot, period.
It's
Part of the whole.
parts of two other lots.
I
It's
know.
not a
It
lot.
doesn't do any justice to that other one, I can tell you that, the way it looks today. I move
If-
we
if-
adjourn.
Second.
Are we through? Any other council comments?
Well, do we want to ask Scott to do anything, or?
It's already been done. Going to have a public hearing.
If I could offer a suggestion, we've already agreed to schedule the public hearing. I've already told you I'm going to bring you the Wiley offer for your February 8th meeting. Maybe at that point, when you look at the two of them in entirety, we come up with an idea of if we want to do something like the mayor suggested about appraising 59 and basing a sale on those, and if they choose to do it, they can, and if they choose not to at that, at least you've got your justification.
Okay, Counselor Bolduc, move to adjourn. Someone second that? Counselor Lippman seconds that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are